maybe that's how I'll. Oh, very fancy. Oh, the five people chatting here, I see. Anyway, I'm Steve Zirinsky, president of the uh, SAS slash Oceania, Society of Australasian Specialists, and member of uh, the Postal Stationery Society of Australia, and a few other societies that I can't remember what they are, but there's a bunch of them. Anyway, but the point is, McMahon, who's uh, uh, is going to talk. He's quite knowledgeable about postal stationery around the world, and so I tapped him to give a presentation on the Pacific Island aerogrammes. And so he's going to talk about. He's going to do a. Ian, correct me if I'm wrong. You can do a presentation, kind of like a general overview, and then dive
Yeah,
in on a few things if people's patience allows it. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining. I see I see Roger. I see Christopher Smith. Thank you. Hey, Chris. Good to see you. Jeff Crawford and well, we all Lorraine, of course. Scott Holmberg is going a incognito. So okay, Ian, I'm going to uh,
I'll start sharing.
Yep. Let me see if
Yep.
I do it correctly. Do you have to give me a? I'm talking. Oh yes, allow.
I've sent you a request to allow sharing.
Yes, I gave it to you, I think. Did it come back to you?
Yes, it did.
Now, I don't know if everybody knows this, but you can organize your screen so that all of everybody else disappears and the presentation can take up the entire screen. If you have any, the way you do that on the upper right-hand corner of the Zoom, you see the little button there that says View, and next to it's a little box with three dots in it. You can click on that, and it gives you a whole different bunch of options to look at. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it says Full Screen, and you press that, and voila, you get the whole presentation. That way, the images are much larger than otherwise. Now I will shut up.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I believe Alan Gorey is with us from Melbourne. And Alan, of course, is very knowledgeable on the aerograms of the South Pacific as well, so he may have some comments to make, which would be great.
Oh, good.
As Steve has said, what I'm planning to do is a survey of the aerograms and air letters of the Southwestern Pacific. I'm not going to specifically cover Australia or New Zealand, but I will mention both quite frequently. A large part of the story in the Pacific of aerograms and air letters is about the formula air letters and aerograms. You can't ignore them, I don't feel, if you're looking at this area. And in part, to some extent, that's due to the influence of New Zealand, amongst others. New Zealand, for those who don't know, they didn't issue their first stamped aerogram, other than the prisoner of war air letters, until the 1980s. So they used formula aerograms the whole time. And certainly that had an influence on quite a number of the countries in the Southwestern Pacific.
Ian, can you explain the difference between a regular aerogram or a formula aerogram versus other types?
Yeah, certainly. So an aerogram is essentially an airmail letter sheet, a letter sheet put on light paper to make it cheaper to carry by plane. They became aerograms when the UPU, they became defined by the UPU to enable a cheaper postage rate. But a formula aerogram is simply an aerogram form or air letter form that doesn't have an imprinted postage stamp on it. And you have to add an adhesive stamp for the postage. The stamped aerograms are postal stationery. They have an imprinted postage stamp. So a formula aerogram is simply an unstamped email letter sheet. And I'm planning to look at the influence on particularly the British Commonwealth Island aerograms from Australia, New Zealand, and British aerogram issues generally. I'm looking at the islands of the Southwest Pacific, so not the former US trust territories, but I'll just briefly mention each of the island groups that are there. And I'll just throw in one slide about what is now West Papua in Indonesia. So I'll start with Australia. The Australian Post Office produced formula aerograms for the Australian territories. They were intended to be used in places like Norfolk Island and Nauru, but and also over in the Indian Ocean territories. But they were also sent or obtained by the post offices in the Solomons and the New Hebrides, the Gilbert and Ellice Islands, and at least one occasion by Fiji, and they were used there as well. The Australian Post Office formula aerograms were based on the current Australian air letter or aerogram of the time, the early ones on the 7-penny air letter, but with the indicium or the stamp, imprinted stamp removed. They were all printed by the note printing branch of the Treasury Department in Melbourne. These two are later ones. They were based on the 10-penny aerogram of the period 1954 to 1959. Properly used for commercial purposes, many of these are very scarce, but certainly the one on the left is reasonably easily obtained mint. And there's an example there used from the British Solomon Islands. And these are the formula aerograms from slightly later periods, 1959 and 1960. The two on the right without the words overseas service. And although you can't actually see it very well, I guarantee you that the one on the left does have overseas service hidden amongst the British Solomon Island stamps.
Were a lot of the formula, a lot of the stamps put on these formula letters in advance? Because it seems like the Norfolk Island one was done that way.
Yeah, I would guess that Norfolk was.
Yeah, Norfolk was.
But with the New Hebrides, and the Solomons, I'm not sure that it was, because there are quite a few very philatelic items. But
Okay.
yeah, someone else might be able to comment on the actual post office's practice. But certainly the Norfolk ones certainly look as if they were
Organized, yeah.
Yeah. And the one on the right is assumed to be an Australian Post Office issue. It's in the right format for a much later period, but it's mainly seen philatelically with that particular stamp and cancel on it. And I've just put the one in the left in a sense a little bit for fun. It's an Australian formula aerogram actually sent from Australia, but they didn't bother putting the postage on it. And so that reads postage insufficient for airmail sent by surface from Sydney to New Plymouth in New Zealand, and has the New Zealand stamp acting as a postage due stamp. Moving to Papua New Guinea, Papua New Guinea went its own way in that it issued its own aerograms and air letters much earlier than Norfolk or Nauru. Until 1953, you could use the Australian aerograms were actually valid, or air letters were valid in Papua New Guinea. The one at the top right it's philatelic, but it does show usage in Port Moresby. And then essentially the stamped aerograms of Papua New Guinea followed the Australian pattern, except with the stamp or indicium having a map of Papua New Guinea. And just a couple more examples, again, very much on the Australian pattern, and printed again in Melbourne at the note printing branch of the Treasury. The one on the left was a commemorative for the World Health Organization meeting in Port Moresby in 1963. These aerogrammes, Papua New Guinea aerogrammes, they're a little bit uncommon used, but they were used, and you can find usages of some commercial usages. Some later ones, again, basically the Australian model of the time, with now the bird of paradise. And after that, they went their own way and produced a nice range of stamped aerogrammes, colourful stamped aerogrammes, featuring a lot of many cases of the birds, and some much more recent issues at the bottom, which Steve would be familiar with. Some intended apparently for use in domestic postage. Airmail is, of course, an important way of getting the mail around in Papua New Guinea, where their roads are a little bit non-existent, particularly up in the highlands. And the International Post, one on the left. One of the things about the Pacific was that with the formula aerogrammes, you had the post office issued ones, and we'll talk more about those, but you also had a range of private, what I'm calling permit aerogrammes. And the tendency in the Pacific seemed to be that you accept any other country's permit aerograms or formula aerograms without much problem. These examples, though, from Papua New Guinea are permits issued by the Papua New Guinea Post Office. So the idea was, and certainly it was an Australian practice, that if you wanted to have a private aerogram, you had to have it approved by the Post Office as meeting the requirements for an aerogram as specified by the UPU, so that it could travel at the reduced aerogram rate. And here are a couple of examples from Papua New Guinea. One on the left, permit aerogram number 10, and two examples of the number 14, which is, you see many of these because they were produced for the use by missionaries in Papua New Guinea, and some of them have quite interesting designs on them as well. As I said, I just have one slide on Netherlands, New Guinea. After Indonesia became independent, Netherlands, New Guinea started issuing its own adhesive stamps as well as postal stationery. The postal stationery featured, standard Dutch designs with the Dutch design stamps. And then briefly, when the plebiscite was being held in 1962, when the UN took control, they were issued overprinted for the UN force of UNTIA. The New Zealand Island territories, Niue, Tokelau, Cook Islands, not surprisingly, used for the most part New Zealand formula aerograms, either the post office one, such as the one at the top right, or Croxley, which was a common New Zealand permit aerogram on the left. And as to why the Australian permit aerogram on the bottom right was used, well, who knows? But as I said, they tended to be accepted quite broadly. And just two from the Cook Islands, one a Croxley aerogram on the left, and the one on right, an Olympic permit aerogram. It's actually printed up, though, for the Rarotongan hotel in the Cook Islands. So, yes, a New Zealand-style form, but printed for use in the Cook Islands. Nauru, again, when it used the formula aerograms provided by the Australian Post Office, but after independence moved to have its own stamped aerograms. This indicium is based on the adhesive stamp design at the time, and again, very much in the Australian format. Again, the 10-cent aircraft from 1974, but then once Australia started moving to what the Australian Post Office at the time called pictorial aerograms produced by commercial suppliers, Nauru did the same. And some of them are quite colourful. Not surprisingly, the frigate bird, which is very much a feature on Nauru, an aerial photo there of the island itself, and then the Tamano flower. A couple of interesting things. The one at the top is a formula aerogram that appeared to have been issued due to a shortage of stamped aerograms. It was heavily criticised at the time because of the very poor map, which didn't show Nauru correctly and certainly didn't show the various different islands of the Pacific in the right position. And I know that we've got a couple of people from Canberra online. The addressee is Judy Cannett, who used to live in Canberra, and her partner at the time was the philatelic officer on Nauru, Derek Brennan. The one at the bottom is simply a postage paid aerogram that for some reason they've put adhesive stamps on as well. Norfolk, again, they used initially the Australian formula aerograms, but once the note printing branch had stopped producing aerograms and Australia had moved to pictorial aerograms, they did the same. And not surprisingly, they feature their green parrot on the aerogram at the top left. The Aussiegram at the bottom left just meant that that was the standard letter rate, which of course had to be carried by air from Norfolk Island to Australia, and the aerogram was for international use.
Now, did these get much commercial use? Or is it really
They
philatelic?
were commercially used, but the population of Norfolk's not that large. It does have a lot of tourists, but they're hard to find commercially used. And I certainly don't have them all. I have a few. And oftentimes when you do see the commercial use, it will be by a stamp collector who's gone and visited Norfolk and sent it back and posted it. I just put the one on the left in because it's a surcharge. It's golfing aerogram. In 2000, they increased the postage rate and they simply surcharged it. The one on the right's quite philatelic, but I don't know why the Norfolk Island government, well, the Philatelic Bureau, wanted to use an Australian permit aerogram and turn it into an official post. But it's responding to a request from a collector. And I have another one of John Corman air letters later on as well. Oh, sorry, we might have already passed it. So the Solomon Islands is interesting. Solomon Islands are located essentially a little bit east of Papua New Guinea. In fact, geographically, Bougainville in Papua New Guinea is part of the Solomon Islands.
Yes, but we can't. That's too early.
So
go back to
they
sleep.
did follow the New Zealand way of doing things. So it's similar to the New Zealand airmail letter cards, but with British Solomon Islands Protectorate, and similarly the one on the left, somewhat later version. So while they did use Australian formula aerograms for a period, they also, the post office produced its own as well. The first stamped aerogram appeared in 1969 with a design based on the 8-cent adhesive stamp of the period with a spear fisherman. But after that, they moved into producing quite a range of colourful stamped aerograms. Quite a good range. The Henderson Field stamp reused or repurposed, the design repurposed on the 70-cent aerogram on the left. Aerograms featuring their flowers, traditional artifacts as well as birds, such as the one at the bottom right. And these are more recent, and that should be 2010, not 1910. Sorry, apologize. So about 2010. 5 aerograms with the Solomon Post logo. quite colourful. One thing interesting to note is that the aerogram featuring a parrot on the top right, it's a bit hard to see on the screen, but the description of the bird is the cardinal honeyeater. Now, the cardinal honeyeater is the small honeyeater featured in the aerogram in the centre. And both the stamp area indicium and the design on the left both have it incorrectly described as a honeyeater, which clearly is a parrot. And as far as I can tell, it's Finch's picnic parrot. But just a few things with Solomon Islands. The only Solomon Islands permit aerogram actually issued by the post office there I've seen is the one shown on the right, which is Post Office Authority number 1. And the left is just an Aspley formula aerogram, which are very commonly used around the Pacific as well as the Australian and New Zealand versions, and quite happily accepted. With New Hebrides and Vanuatu, we've seen the use in New Hebrides of Australian formula aerograms, and no doubt there'll be many others. But the first stamped aerogram was in 1971 and 35 gold centimes. New Hebrides, of course, being both controlled by both the UK and France. And when they became independent in 1980, various aerograms were overprinted for Vanuatu. Some later designs with the flying fish and the heron. And after that, they've produced a whole range of very colourful and appropriate designs featuring native fish and turtles and dolphins and whales and birds. Tonga is quite interesting in its own way. It very much followed a New Zealand pattern initially with the Tonga airmail letter cards, followed by the formal aerograms inscribed Tongan Postal Administration. And they seem to be quite well used. Other people on the airmail, in Aerophilatulus, would have more knowledge of airmail routes, but with Tonga, certainly a lot of didn't have airmail links initially, so oftentimes these would have found their way to Fiji, I think, and been sent from there. For some reason, the formula aerogram on the right was used by the Post Office again, the Philatelic Bureau, rather than making use of their own. But they then issued a range of stamped aerograms from 1970 with Tongan Tapa, and it comes in various denominations as the postage rates increased and various sizes. I just put the one in on the right just to remind people that people do travel. The aerogram on the right, bottom at the right, while obviously bought in Tonga, was posted in Samoa, and Samoan stamps have been added as well. But the message indicates that it's from a person traveling around in a yacht. So it would have been bought in Tonga but not used until he arrived in Samoa, and the message talks about his visit to Apia. And for 1972, they had a Christmas aerogram. Again, you get a range of formula aerograms from New Zealand, both post office versions and Croxley. And the one on the right, another Aspley formula aerogram, all quite happily accepted. The Gilbert and Ellice Islands, we did see a couple of examples used of Australian formula aerograms, but they issued a Christmas formula aerogram back about 1969, maybe a number of different years. And they then issued 2 Christmas stamped aerograms, one in 1972, which was in green. The cachet is the same or similar to the formula aerogram. And then they did it again in 1973 in the blue color design on the right. There's a formula aerogram there used by the philatelic bureau again in Tarawa. And a Croxley aerogram on the right from Gilbert and Ellice Islands. Gilbert and Ellice Islands became independent as Kiribati and Tuvalu. As far as I know, that's the only stamped aerogram from Kiribati, certainly the one I've seen. The one on the right is a private production, has a number of nice photos in it, which were taken by, as far as I can tell, a missionary called Father Vermond. So most likely produced by either himself or by the mission that he was at, and then addressed to Canada. The only stamped aerograms I know of from Tuvalu are these two, with the UPU symbol on the right and the map on the left. Samoa has issued two groups of stamped aerograms, the one featuring the shells, the cowrie shells and other things. They had three values because there were different rates depending on whether your aerogram was going to, say, New Zealand or Australia or Europe or wherever. And then the two on the right with the beach scenes in 1988. But again, a range of former aerograms have been used, particularly in, well, these two come from Aspley aerograms. I've just put an American Samoa in for completeness. As far as I'm aware, they used American aerograms and still do. The aerogram on the right, though, it's a British aerogram posted by someone on a cruise ship visiting Pago Pago, and it requires he's writing home to his parents in England, and it's got a nice Paco bow marking on it from Pago Pago. There may be a couple of people online who can actually work out who the person was who posted that aerogram. He was a stamp collector, but the message is purely family related, although he does ask that the aerogram be kept because he was hoping that it would get a Paco bow marking. The French island territories, of course, weren't terribly influenced by New Zealand or Australia or the British way of doing things. New Caledonia didn't issue stamped aerograms until 1972. They're similar to the French Polynesian ones, which we'll come to shortly. But they did issue a range of more colourful aerograms in the 1990s. So French Polynesia, so the ones on the right, a sort of flying fish design, come in various denominations as the postage increased. The one on the left shows an overprinted version for 100 francs on 90 francs. This is a slide. These two slides were run the wrong way. This is where I should have meant to start. The 1976 26 franc. There was a similar 20 franc design 2 years before, and then the introduction of the design for the 30 francs. Waltz and Futuna, no aerograms before 2002. There's this one from about 2003. I don't know if there are any others. It's the only one I've seen, but there could well be others. The references I have, of course, stop in about 2002 when the catalogue of aerograms from Australia and Oceania produced by Wygand only go up to 2002. Pitcairn's not the sort of place that you think about with aerograms. They don't have an airstrip, and so any aerograms or air letters leaving the islands have to go by ship. Christopher Smith is online, and I thank him for letting me show these, which I found quite fascinating, at least given their They come from Pitcairn. The messages are personal, and it's a group of formula aerograms and from various places, but used from Pitcairn. And this is a very attractive one issued by the East African
I think
Post
the
Office.
the giraffes are indigenous to Pitcairn, aren't they?
Oh, definitely, yes. But for those who remember, we had Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika. They did use a lot of formula aerograms, and there was a brief period when they were trying to have an East African postal cooperate on postal services, and this one appears to be from that period. But I find it quite attractive. But to move to the next group, and these are Croxley from New Zealand and Aspley, British style aerograms. The one on the left, and Christopher is here and he could comment, but my understanding, Christopher, is that one of the supply routes was in fact to the canal zone. The supply boat would head into the canal zone and the mail would be deposited there. And it's got a very nice Balboa canal zone backstamp on it, indicating that that was how it travelled.
That was the standard, Ian, for any kind of airmail dropped off at the canal zone at Balboa and then entered into the sort of whole airmail program. Yeah. Everything's in and out by ship for Pitcairn.
That's right. So that's show the proof of how it actually travelled, which is great.
And it shows it really did what it's supposed to do. It's like better than a judge's an expertise. It's the best expertising work you could get for that kind of thing.
That's right. Fiji probably had, of all the Pacific islands, the most and most complex aerograms issued. They had a completely different pattern, not to begin with, but in the end they went their own way. I don't know how we're going for time as to how far we can go through Fijian aerograms, but I thank Paul Xavier for this part of the presentation. They again followed the New Zealand route initially with formula aerograms with Fiji airmail letter card on it. Actually, I'll note that the reference to Fijian aerograms is Ross Dubrell's Postal Stationery of Fiji, as well as that Paul has noted there. So there are a number of versions of the airmail letter card from Fiji. They did, for temporary shortages, use both the New Zealand airmail letter cards, such as the one on the left, and I think from this one from an Australian formula aerogram. A supply was sent over due to a shortage of the Fijian form. A couple of oddities. Fijian, they also produced forms, for use for the OHMS on the right, and another one, Fiji one, used on the left with a meter mark. A range of formula aerograms. They accepted just about everything, whether they were from Aspley's or New Zealand. The one on the left is an unusual thing I find from Government House in Suva. At top right, there's an Australian permit aerogram. All of the Australian banks in Fiji just used Australian permit formula aerograms. ANZ, the Australian New Zealand Bank, or the Bank of New South Wales, were quite happily, and they were completely accepted. So coming back to Paul's, when they did move to stamp aerograms in 1947, they adopted the design of the standard British key plate in King George VI. And the other thing was they were printed in the UK, as Paul has said, by McCorkadales.
Why would they go to UK to have it printed rather than in Australia?
Well, it was standard practice for British colonies to go to the UK. the adhesive stamps would have been being printed in the UK.
Okay.
So yes, I'm not sure why they would have not gone to Australia, but
Fiji was the Western Pacific Commission for the colonial government, wasn't it? They're a big centre for
yes.
Everything.
postal services. Yeah.
But as you can see, it's quite a different approach to most of the other British Commonwealth islands. The population is somewhat larger. Actually, I digress a little bit and move to the Indian Ocean briefly, but at one point, Christmas Island got a quote for getting aerogrammes produced by the note printing branch, and then got a quote from McCorquodale, and they were rather surprised that the McCorquodale cost was much less. And then they had them printed in McCorquodale by McCorquodale. But that's another story for a different ocean. And there were two rates at the time. A threepenny rate was to Australia, New Zealand, Pacific, and the sevenpenny rate to the rest of the world, particularly England. And you can see on the one on the left, you have a three-line inscription under air letter, and they moved to a four-line inscription. And when they come to the Queen Elizabeth reign in 1955, they again used the key plate design. And they still had threepenny and sevenpenny values. They changed to the Antigone portrait in 1957 for Queen Elizabeth. And again, the still maintaining threepenny and sevenpenny values. Now, these come with watermarks, imperial airmail watermarks with different codes based on which year they were printed in. The aerogrammes are known number of varieties, with the indicium missing. You get specimen varieties as well.
Was the watermark paper always the same direction? I know, like with some of the KUT stuff, it's sometimes upside down, sometimes sideways, sometimes this way, sometimes that way.
I think from memory, we'll have a look. It's sideways there, but I think you'll find it will probably vary. A new design with palms on the left. In 1962, several watermarks, 1962 to 7, no watermarks at various periods. Watermark P inverted. Watermark with the T. No watermark. So in 1969, Fiji changed to decimal currency. And so you have 5 cents. They're still using the imperial airmail watermark paper. The 10 penny became 8 cents. Change of watermark to Air Cockerel with code E upright. In 1971, there was a shortage of 5 cent aerogrammes, so they surcharged the 8 cent ones 5 cents. It's relatively uncommon used, or quite very uncommon properly used. For aerogram, people may know that the aerogram on the right is addressed to Lava in New York. They company that specialised in aerogrammes, and it's offering to sell larva examples of this aerogram. So commercial use, albeit to a stamp dealer. So in 1972, of the change in UPU regulations, they moved to the wider format for aerograms, adopting a flying fish design that they would use from 1972 until the end of the stamped aerograms, and the values would go up as the postage rates changed. The 5 cent and 8 cent aerograms issued. One note was that for a brief period, the Australian Philatelic Bureau actually started selling Fijian stamps and postal stationery, and so that the first printings of the 5 cent and 8 cent were sold by the Australian Philatelic Bureau, and for that reason, at least in Australia, examples of these two aerograms are very common. But it does mean that they didn't sell the second printing, so the second printing had to be obtained from Fiji itself if you were Australian. So, and there are notable colour variations in that issue. The 10 cent new rate in 1975, and after that, as the rate goes up, the aerogram changes. So you have an 18 cent value. I think there's a 15 cent value as well. 25 cent value, and then a postage paid version in 1995. So that's the end of what I was proposing to say. But I hope it's of interest, and I know that a number of people online who know a lot about these things as well. So if there are any comments people would like to make or questions.
Very brave of you presenting when there are other knowledgeable people on board.
Yes, no, it is.
Ian, this is Frederick. I
Yes.
am not one of the knowledgeable people in the audience, but I do have a question about one of the Vanuatu examples that you showed. It's addressed to Greg Jorgensen in Australia.
Yes.
I know him as a stamp dealer, and because I bought some Scouts and Scouting on stamps, that's my collecting area, material from him in the 1980s and 1990s, and just wondering if you or anybody else, there it is, Greg Jorgensen, and know anything more about him. That was now almost 45 years ago. Don't know if he's still with us.
Yeah, he is.
Oh, good.
He's still around. He was getting an operation, I think, this month, but he doesn't expect to go anywhere.
Yeah, the aerogram's clearly philatelic. There's no message in it, and it's sealed. So, not surprised to hear that he was a stamp dealer, but I don't know him. Obviously, Steve does. So,
I don't think of him primarily as a stamp dealer. I mean, I think he does trade.
no,
but he's known as a collector primarily for his Tonga. He has a I think I'm going to say classic Tonga, as well as the modern shell, seashells, and aquatic animals definitives from the 1980s, which had a lot of reprints. So he's focused on those two things.
In the 1990s, the Tonga government sold some of their postal archives, I guess, to make money. And he had contact in the government, maybe even in the archives. And if you had an interest in a particular Tonga issue, you could let him know. And he would ask the contact in the archives to pull any material in the archives from that particular issue and pass it along to you. And so I asked him, what could he find from there's a 1982 scouting issue that was the 75th anniversary of scouting. And then in 1990, Nuafu, pardon my pronunciation, but I believe that's a dependency of Tonga, also issued a follow-on scouting set. And my goodness, the amount of material that he was able to liberate through his friend in the archives. I have all of the artists' sketches and the paste up work for those issues in an exhibit that I haven't shown for a number of years. That exhibit has been in the box for about 25 or so years. But thinking today that I would get to see Steve, and Steve, if your memory is as good as mine, at New York 2016, you sold me a cover that has the high value from the Tonga 1982 set.
Yes.
That is hardly ever used. That got me thinking about Jorgensen and the Tonga archives, and that would be an interesting story, which I myself might try to put together if somebody knows more about the sale of those archives than I do, just from my own involvement in dealing with Jorgensen.
I don't know where he got it from. You know, there is a person, I think Alan Benjamin, who was the one who was in charge of procuring stamps for the government. He's a British fellow, and he spent a lot of time working on their stamp program. I want to say from the 1970s to the early 2000s. Does that sound right? Anyway, he would be, maybe he was talking to him, I don't know, but got me on that. And I did try to ask Greg, though, if he would want to give a presentation. He wasn't really jumping at the bit. So, Ian, about what you're doing, I guess we're done, so we can put it back to the main menu.
Yep.
So we can do see faces. Okay, thanks. I think it's a wonderful presentation, and I think it's going down lanes or avenues that we really don't explore too much, which I think is a great deal of fun. Now, it'd be nice to do a catalog or like a listing of these things. So, if you know, because sometimes they're much rarer than you realize, and because they just look like aerograms in a box. Because I think some of the if an Australian one is used in New Hebrides, and maybe the number 14 is used all the time, but if there's a different number that's used or a different printing, I think it'd be kind of handy to
a brief comment on the literature sources, at least for the official post office aerograms and the stamped aerograms. So the Australian formula aerograms for the territories are catalogued both in the Brisbane and White postal stationery catalogue, and also in Stein's book on Australian aerograms. The early Papua New Guinea aerograms are in both as well. The Australian Commonwealth Specialist Catalogue Postal Stationery volume covers Commonwealth Australia Postal Stationery that was up to the end of the printings by the note printing branch of the Reserve Bank. Doesn't cover those after they move to commercial activity. So, but it does include that one. Yes, you need the second edition to get the best effect. That is the second edition, though. Yes, it is. It covers Papua New Guinea,
yes.
Some of the Nauruan ones, maybe not some of the Nauruan ones, but Stein's book does. But for the stamped aerograms after that, that's right. There's a little catalogue which may be hard to find now, um, and it's in German. But the editor was Weingant, and it was the catalogue of the aerogrammes of Australia and Oceania, and it goes up to about 2002. So all of the islands that I've covered here, which had stamped aerogrammes up to that point, you'll find the issues in that little catalogue, which is really great. Fiji is, as I said, Ross Dubrell's book and other sources. The Kessler catalogues, of course, but they don't go up very far.
Wrong. This is the wrong one. Sorry.
That's the wrong one. It's a much later production for Africa.
Yeah, America. No, it's
America, was it?
Yeah.
Anyway, there was one for
Same
Africa
place,
as well.
same kind of thing. America, Africa.
Yes.
No difference.
But yeah, there is a little volume for Australia and Oceania that's certainly worth having. The Kessler catalogue is still useful because they listed official aerogrammes, and like there are a couple of examples of where the Fijian formula aerogram were used for official purposes, and you may find them listed in Kessler. The New Zealand formula aerogrammes, there are a number of references around to those, which I don't have at my fingertips. So there is information out there, but there are
Would that
also
be Samuel's? Wouldn't that be with the New Zealand to be Samuel?
well,
Books?
the New Zealand aerograms are not postal stationery, so they're not in Samuel's. I don't know if volume 9 maybe. I have to check. But
Yeah,
anyway,
you're right. You're right.
New Zealand didn't issue stamped aerograms other than prisoner of war air letters until the 1980s. But there is information out there. But on the same token, as people certainly like Alan Gorey would know, there's so much there that's undocumented, and the use of private formula aerograms is not generally documented.
I think it's a wonderfully rich area to explore. I mean, because I think
Yes,
anybody on this
I
call or
think it
anybody
is.
looking at this video could go, "Oh, I can," with a little bit of work, I could,
Mm,
start to understand what's common, what's not common,
common.
and
And the modern aerograms, the more modern ones after 2002-ish, there's not a lot on them.
right.
Recorded spaces, and someone else may have seen the Tuvalan aerograms used. I certainly haven't. But
I don't think I have. I mean, even the first day cover of it, I don't think I've seen.
well, I showed two. The two I showed were cancelled. I think first day cover, but certainly cancelled the order.
I might have seen one of those, the Tuvalu.
Sorry, Jeff.
I may have seen one of those Tuvalu.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure they're probably around. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but not easy to come by.
No, and I haven't seen them used Kiribati aerogram.
I think I have one unused.
Yes.
As a research, was the Robert Stein book mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just went to get that myself because I forget exactly what it covered and what it didn't cover. But there's several pieces of what we covered today that are definitely here. For example, the PNG is very well documented here in this book.
They are the early PNG ones that were printed by the note printing branch in Melbourne to the Australian format when it was still Papua and New Guinea, the territory of. And he also covers the Australian formula aerograms for use in the territories, and then also, as we saw, Gilbert and Elise and Solomons and the New Hebrides are well covered in Stein's book as well.
Now, when you do get these commercially used, sometimes where they're going to is interesting because if it's got, I have, Ian and I have talked about this, I have a cover that goes from one, I think from New Caledonia, I think it was New Caledonia to Australia. And it's unusual to jump, it's essentially jump ship. In other words, it's not going to France, it's going to Australia versus something from Australia or British territories going to the French territories. That there wasn't that much mail going back and forth between them. So it's another layer of complexity
Yes, no, that's right.
or interest, if you want to call it that. I don't know. Complexity is the
It's
right
not
word.
something that I understand completely, although partly it's due to the fact that Australia is part of the British Commonwealth. But a lot of Australians have a complete mental block when it comes to the French Pacific territories, particularly New Caledonia. New Caledonia is one of the closest foreign places to Australia after Papua New Guinea and East Timor and Indonesia. It's closer to Australia than New Zealand is. And yet so many Australians aren't aware of it, the existence of New Caledonia. I just find it perplexing.
Well, a lot of things are perplexing.
Yes.
Alan
Ian,
is. Oh,
Ian, can I ask a question? First of all, thank you for your display. But what's the story behind different rates for different areas of the world for aerograms? I was under the impression that one aerogram was one rate for anywhere in the world.
So that's the common practice, certainly after the UPU formally allowed aerograms at a special rate. But there many countries did have different rates, including Canada to start with. Like Canada had 10 cents and 15 cent aerograms, 10 cents to the UK, 15 cents to everywhere else. But as you said, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, they did have such rates, and it's not necessarily against the, I don't think, against the UPU regulations to have a cheaper rate than the UPU rate. But yeah, a number of countries persisted with it for a long time. Some, like Canada, used it for
Yes.
a short period.
I know what you just
But
said.
other countries, well, Australia,
Wait a few more minutes.
just went to the one rate straight away.
Presentation is over. Yes. Just have to wait.
So not that uncommon, actually, when you look at the aerograms of various countries, particularly far-flung places.
Thank you.
But certainly an area where the new things keep popping up all the time.
that's my job.
Yes. And yes, I think there's another story there particularly for people interested in airmail routes as to which islands actually had airmail services and where the aerogram had to go before it actually got into the airmail.
Well, like the Pitcairn Island
Well,
thing is a good
Pitcairn's an
example of
obvious
that.
one,
Yeah.
but even Tonga initially, yes, they may have had an airmail rate, but an air-letter rate, but it would have gone at least part of the way by ship. And when did airmail services come to Samoa or Papua New Guinea is a bit different because we're lacking in roads.
It was easiest way to ship the gold was by plane.
It was.
Put a stamp on it and off it goes.
So the high-value Papua New Guinea adhesive stamps had an actual purpose.
Yeah, and they do show up at
Pay for
auction.
the gold parcels.
Yeah, and they have the parcel tags. And I think with the high
Yes.
values on it show up at Aussie auctions with I wouldn't say regularity, but they show up.
So Alan asked a question or made a comment about private permanent aerograms may have been sold in island post offices. I think in some cases that's almost certainly true, but I don't have documentation of when that occurred. There's some suggestion to swap oceans for a minute at Cocos, for example, that may have occurred, but yes, we're just lacking in evidence. But some of them are so common. I mean, if they weren't available in post offices, they would have been available, whatever, at the local shop.
Yeah, he also says here that early Solomon air letters had multiple aerogram rates.
Yes.
So how would that work? So I mean, meaning the different zones, Australia versus US
Yeah, so
versus
most
England,
commonly it was sort of Australia, New Zealand, or the Pacific,
and then
uh,
everywhere else.
well, everywhere else, but oftentimes you had three rates. So there's another zone as well.
Well, I see we've worn our welcome with Alan. He has to leave. So,
And he makes a comment that my grandchildren would not even know what an aerogram is. Well, this is absolutely true, of course.
yes, I know. Not, it won't be just his
And
grandchildren, anybody.
the aerograms, well, these days you send an email or a text message or a WhatsApp message or something, and you've got the equivalent of an aerogram. So it's not surprising that they have disappeared. Many countries have stopped issuing them. Australia, you can still buy an aerogram, but I think it may well be the last. But countries like Canada stopped years ago.
Some of the
Uh,
islands, when I request to get them, sometimes they have to. The older people know what I'm talking about. The younger ones have no clue.
that's right.
But they'll find a pad or a wad of them, and then they're mostly stuck together because they've been sitting in a drawer somewhere. No one's touched them for a decade. It'd be at least a decade.
Yep.
They've just been sitting there. Although I remember from, I don't know which post office it was, maybe the St. Kitts, where a woman said, "Oh yeah, some lady comes in every December 1st and gets 8 aerograms. We always have to make sure they're sitting here for her."
Yep.
It's like, and, she's the only one who buys them all year long. That's it. Nobody else. I don't know.
So it was an email envelope rather than an aerogram. And I tried to think, I think it may have been UA. It wasn't UA, it was Tokolo. A couple of Australian stamp collectors visited and they went to the post office and it turned out they had a stack of these email envelopes that no one had ever seen. Stamp
Right.
and
And
postal station.
you don't know. Yeah.
Sorry?
No, you just don't know. But
Oh, you just don't know. No.
you don't know
So
what's hiding behind the counter.
if they hadn't visited, we would never have seen it. Whereas now there are a few of them around that obviously brought home and they posted quite a few as well.
Good
And
presentation, Ian. You're going to get me diving through my early Solomon Islands
yes, that's the
postal
intention.
material, looking at it anew.
That's the idea.
And if
Go
you
down
start looking,
untraveled roads.
yeah, and don't forget the postal regulations provide some advice on our letters and what the rates were. Makes comments like, to go at the aerogram rate, it has to be approved by the post office. And I sort of laugh at that. But they're accepting aerograms. Not all countries, of course, accept other people's form aerograms. I have somewhere a New Zealand form aerogram used in the UK, which has a nice cachet on it saying, well, this is not an aerogram. And then the Brits taxed it.
But
So
of course,
there's no sign of that at all in the Pacific.
interesting. But you'd have to use the local current country's current stamps. You couldn't use another stamp. Couldn't use a
Oh,
stamp for.
for a form aerogram, you have to add the adhesive stamps of the other country. Yes.
All right. Now, if it was a pop boat thing, that would be allowed as well, though, right? Because we
So
saw
if it was,
a packet boat. Say
Pacabos is different. Yeah.
say I'm a sailboat and I wrote a letter and like Samoa and I mailed it from Tonga like you showed.
Well,
Uh,
you paid for the postage, but it doesn't count when you
in
get to
that case, it
Southern
didn't count because they didn't get it done as a packet boat.
Just there's no
They just
value.
went to the post office. Yeah.
Yeah. But the collector who posted the aerogram with the Pango Paco boat markings was Edric Druce, who lived
Oh yeah.
in Canberra. He was a well-known postal historian and exhibitor. Unfortunately, died quite young. But yeah, so that was something he'd posted to his parents, who then kept it for him so that he could have the Paco boat marking.
It's good.
But if it was a packet boat, didn't the original stamps would have done the job? He didn't have to put.
Sorry, that exactly right, and that's what Steve was saying. That because it was posted on the ship using British stamps, they were completely accepted for postage and acquired the Pacobo marking. Yes.
So Ian, when can we do a display of this? Like, how can we entice more people to be into this? Or do we want to?
Oh, well, there's enough there for many people to be involved, I would have thought. Certainly enough challenge in finding many of these things and understanding what was going on at the time, looking at the regulations and the routes and the like. So there's an awful lot there.
I mean, I've been looking for the last 5 or 10 years just for modern Solomon Islands commercially used aerogrammes or
Yeah.
postal stationery, whatever. It's just not out there.
Well, these days you don't. More modern stuff from bigger countries like Australia, Canada, and wherever. You wonder why anyone would use an aerogram at all.
No, really. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a dying art. Well, I'm going to say at this point, we can keep talking, but I just want everybody to know that next month, on the 17th of July, Roy, who's in the screen here, is doing a presentation on P&G departure tax stamps. And David Hopper, who's not here, will do also be talking about 2 Australian definitive series, the Living Together series and the 78 tree series. And he's going to be doing 2 studies on that. So it'll be another interesting presentation of stuff that's not often talked about. So, and that's what I like to see. But I'm not trying to curtail the conversation. So please ask Ian or any more questions or any other questions for that matter.
You've left us speechless.
Oh,
Just to say this, I mean, I thought this was very informative. It's about something I didn't know anything about. Scott Bloomberg, I mean, Georgia. And thank you for doing it. I guess I have a personal question. What got you started on this particular topic? I mean, did you find something unusual and thought, could I find more of it? Or
so for those who don't know, I've best known for postal stationery collecting generally. I did start out, actually, one of the first areas I started out was with Australian aerograms. But I'm more perhaps better known for Canada, New Zealand, and Queensland postal stationery. But I've always had a soft spot for the South Pacific as well. And I started at one point collecting Fiji aerograms, but never followed through to the extent that Paul Xavier or Ross Dubril did. But I've just always found the South Pacific interesting. And at the time I was starting to get into postal stationery, the Australian territories, but also Fiji, were available from the Philatelic Bureau. So I was able to buy the Fijian aerograms from the 5 cent and 8 cent aerograms, but also their registered envelopes and their stamped envelopes as well. And so it's just naturally flowed from that.
It's a good question.
I'll get a little idiosyncratic with this. Why this particular thing. I agree with you. I agree with you, Ian. I personally find the whole Western Pacific, South Pacific, just a fascinating
Yes.
area. There's so much there.
Someone has the same problem as Fred. Oh, okay. Well, whatever. That's why we all like
Oh,
it.
feeding cats. Okay.
They're a little bit dangerous, these presentations, because you find yourself opening up new collecting pursuits.
That's right.
Yeah, just when you think you'd settled on your key areas, it's like, oh, look at that. Yeah. Yeah, looking with aerograms at new eyes now. So
Yeah, so maybe that's why everybody's has got the stunned
Stunned
silence, because they're
silence.
all like the possibilities are like endless now.
Yeah.
It was all organized before you, and thanks a lot. Now it's all gone to hell
Okay.
in a handbasket.
everyone,
Okay, thanks. It's a good subject to go through, and again, I could find myself getting interested in many side areas from that. Just preparing that talk.
I can believe that. Sure.
we're all going to be rushing to your website, Steve, and
Yes.
I don't know. Well, yes, maybe no. But to me, it's interesting because it is like a stone unturned, So when I go down to the post offices or I communicate with them to try to get stuff, it's they don't sometimes know what they have,
No. No.
and in trying to explain to them what they have, you start to look like a three-headed monster, which
You
isn't
just
necessarily
reminded me
terrible.
once that New Zealand has started the practice of overprinting its postal stationery with new rates. And it came apparent to me that the Philatelic Bureau had no idea what had been issued. And so in order to test them out, I started asking them for things that I thought might exist, some of which turned up, but they had never admitted to. And these are all now catalogued in Samuel's catalogues and in the postage stamps of New Zealand, Volume 9. But it was just that they were overprinting anything that they had. And so I said, well, you've told me about, I think I ordered something and something turned up that they hadn't admitted to having issued. So I just sent this request to them for things I thought that might exist, and some of them did. And if New Zealand can do that, then any of the islands are the same.
Well, they're not overprinting it for collectors; they're overprinting it for use.
They were.
And so you're not going to the two hands are not part of the same body.
That's right. And that's a bit like the Fijian overprinted aerogram and why it's scarce, relatively scarce, because it wouldn't have been known initially to the stamp collecting world.
Can't believe what they tell you. That's just all there is to it.
Well, that's true.
Okay,
Well,
I'm
it
going to
happens
stop.
everywhere. I once visited the post office at Wagga Wagga in Australia, and they had a stamped envelope there I'd never seen before. Certainly wasn't in any philatelic bulletin.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.